Today we will talk about the classification of beta blockers. So before going into the detail with the classification of beta blockers, let us take one concept, that is, suppose we have a patient. We have a patient with ischemic heart disease, or angina or myocardial infarction. We advise such a patient that they should not get stressed, or they should not get excited, or they should not get emotional. So why we advise them that they should not get stressed, excited or emotional? The reason behind that, if the patient with ischemic heart disease, angina or myocardial infarction, this patient gets stressed, their body releases. So the patient with ischemic heart disease, angina or myocardial infarction, if this patient gets stressed, their body releases adrenaline. Suppose this is one ventricular myocardial cell. Suppose this is one ventricular myocardial cell. This patient's body releases adrenaline in a case of stress. Their patient's body releases adrenaline. So this adrenaline goes and binds on the receptors which are present on the ventricular myocardial cell. This receptor is nothing but beta 1 adrenergic receptor. So this receptor is nothing but beta 1 adrenergic receptors. So in the case of stress, their body releases adrenaline, and this adrenaline goes and binds on the receptors which are present on the ventricular myocardial cell. Once it get attached to these receptors, this adrenaline once get attached to these receptors, it stimulates one protein. Called as G stimulatory protein. So this G stimulatory protein further goes and stimulates adenylyl cyclase. So this adenylyl cyclase goes and stimulates, or goes and converts ATP into cyclic AMP. This adenylyl cyclase goes and converts ATP into cyclic AMP. So this cyclic AMP goes and further stimulates, its cyclic AMP further goes and stimulates the protein kinase A. This protein kinase A is an enzyme, and this protein kinase A has a function that it phosphorylates the calcium channel. The calcium channel. So this protein kinase A enzyme further phosphorylates the calcium channels. Suppose these are the calcium channel which are present on the ventricular myocardial cell. So this calcium channel is firstly it is blocked, or firstly it is closed. Once protein kinase A goes and phosphorylate the calcium channel, this calcium channel get open. And hence it leads to a influx of calcium. So calcium from outside the cell comes inside the cell. So more and more calcium get influx. So this is not a normal phenomena. This is something abnormal. That is, this is not a normal influx of calcium. This is something which is abnormal. That is, it is abnormal influx of calcium because of the adrenaline. So adrenaline started the cycle and further leads to the influx of calcium, which is not normal. So this is the new diagram, that is it indicates that this is the normal action potential generated in the ventricular myocardial cell. This is the normal action potential which is generated in the ventricular myocardial cell. So if there is a abnormal influx of calcium, so more and more calcium get influx, and this entry of cations, that is entry of positive charges inside the cell, the resting membrane potential cannot really rest. So due to the influx of calcium, the resting membrane potential start going up, and finally it reaches to a threshold potential. Finally, once it reaches to a threshold potential, it further leads to the same graph. So this is unwanted triggered, or this is unwanted firing of the this is unwanted ectopic firing, and this is not normal, and this is abnormal phenomenon. So that's why, due to the influx of more and more calcium, the abnormal ectopic triggered of this resting membrane potential, and further it leads to ventricular arrhythmias, which are not normal, and it is very a serious condition. It further leads to a death of the patient. So ventricular arrhythmias, if ventricular fibrillation or ventricular arrhythmia goes into the ventricular fibrillation, and ventricular fibrillation, if it is not treated properly, it further leads to a death of the patient. So this is very critical condition, and it only happens due to the abnormal influx of calcium. Hence there is necessity to block this calcium channel, and this is only be happen only when if we block the beta 1 receptors which are present on the ventricular myocardial cells. Suppose this is beta 1 receptor, beta 1 adrenergic receptor. So once we block this beta 1 adrenergic receptor, further cycle get cut off. Hence there is necessity of blocking of this beta 1 adrenergic receptor. So once we block this beta 1 adrenergic receptor, further cycle get cut off, and there will be no any influx of calcium, and there will be no any serious condition. Hence we can by blocking this beta 1 adrenergic receptors, we can prevent these serious conditions like ventricular arrhythmias or ventricular fibrillation or death. So let's start with the classification of beta blockers. So beta blockers are further classified into two main types. First is that is cardioselective beta blocker, and second is that is non-cardioselective beta blocker. Let us talk about the cardioselective beta blocker. The cardioselective beta blockers are those beta blockers. They are selectively, or they are exclusively acts on the beta 1 receptor which is present in heart. So cardioselective beta blockers are primarily acts on beta 1 receptors which are present inside the heart. So let's start with the mnemonics of the cardioselective beta blockers, which can help us to memorize the cardioselective beta blockers. So mnemonics for the cardioselective beta blockers are: new exclusive beta blockers are acting mainly cardioselective. So N stands for nebiolol, E stands for ismolol, B stands for bisoprolol, B stands for bitoxolol, A stands for S-butolol, A stands for atenolol, M stands for metoprolol, and C stands for celiprolol. Hence, so second part is that is non-cardioselective beta blockers. So these non-cardioselective beta blockers are exclusively acts on beta 1 receptors which are present inside the heart. Beta 1 receptors which is present inside the heart, and beta 2 receptor which is present elsewhere in body. So this non-cardioselective beta blocker is furtherly acts on beta 1 receptors which are present inside the heart, and beta 2 receptors which is present elsewhere in the body. So with partial agonist or sympathomimetic activity, the mnemonics for these beta blockers are contain partial agonist like property. So C stands for celiprolol or cartiolol. This P stands for pindololol, A stands for S-butolol, L stands for labetalol, and finally P stands for pentabutylol. Let us further starts with the membrane stabilizing local anesthetic activity beta blockers. So the mnemonics for this beta blockers is possesses local anesthetic membrane stabilizing property. So this P stands for propanolol, L stands for labetalol, A stands for S-butylol, M stands for metoprolol, and P stands for pindololol. So this is all about the beta blockers. So this S-butylol beta blocker appears in all three classes. It appears in all three classes, that is cardioselective as well as non-cardioselective. Labetalol and pindololol, this is non-cardioselective and they appears only in two classes, that is with partial agonist like activity or membrane stabilizing activity. Third, that is metoprolol. Metoprolol appears in two classes only, that is they acts as a cardioselectively and acts as a membrane stabilizing activity. They acts as a cardioselectively as well as membrane stabilizing. They have a membrane stabilizing action. So last, that is propanolol. Propanolol has a maximum membrane stabilizing property. Propanolol is the beta blocker which has a maximum membrane stabilizing property. So this is all about the beta blockers and the classification of beta blockers or importance of beta blockers.